We are going to have lesson 22. We're going to go ahead and go right into lesson 22. I'm a little bit excited about this because this is the meat and bones of JavaScript. Week 10, I gave you guys just a little bit to work on the homework assignments directly from the book. The reason being is because you have a little bit more support and a little bit better understanding just following, verbatim what the book is telling you and whatever resources there are there readily available. Lesson 22, we're going to go ahead and talk about some of the things that you saw in the previous assignment and start working on stuff that is going to be more helpful for you for your upcoming project. Therefore, we're going to go ahead and get right to it. Um, let's go ahead and jump into the second slide. All right. First thing that we like to acknowledge when working with JavaScript: variables. Variables is the heart and soul of programming. Reason is because that's the data you're going to be working with. Variables is basically data that you're going to take in. You can take in or you have to declare it. In JavaScript, it's very important to be declaring your variables at the very forefront of your programming scripts so that you can be situated where and when those variables get used so throughout the whole programming code. The reason that I'm saying that is because let's go ahead get right. All right, I prepared some slides and I will elaborate why it is important for you to declare your variables as soon as possible, possibly even moving them up to the front. That way you have easiest access and just, you might start with one variable and then at the end of the code you might end up with dozens of variables. That is all just dependent on how much data you're going to be working with, especially with forms, or even with um, just simply creating a I find that I'm a loss at words, but it just to create basically anything out of JavaScript, you will need some type of data to work with, and those are usually declared in your variables. A simple analogy that I want to present with you guys. Yes, I like to think of variables as a backpack. For instance, if you're going to prepare to go hiking, what are you going to need right there and then? So you start making yourself a list and you prepare with those items and you put them in your backpack. And that's what your variable is your backpack where you're going to start holding all your data. For lack of a better terms, this is the best analogy that I can come up with. And it's worked in the past and hopefully you can get a clearer picture of exactly what a variable is. Now, there's different types of variables. A variable can be declared as a variable itself by using var, and we should not have any problems because we're coming up with HTML5. All browsers nowadays, I think there's one that just went extinct. Internet Explorer just went extinct, and I don't even think you should be worrying about that. But any and all new browsers should be able to support just var, which is just standard for a variable. Now, except there's another one that says let and construct. Um, Typically, I don't like to use let variables, but you can use let variables if you cannot use a construct, and I'll talk about that later. And of course, there are also other references in W3 schools that I'll add to this video and to this. I'll upload this PowerPoint as well, so you guys can have you know uh, this information or resources when it comes to trying to understand what variables are. So we talked about different types of variables: variable, let, and construct, or a constant. I'm sorry, a constant. There. So it is very important to declare a variable. Therefore, this is a very, very good example I've taken just to give you guys an idea of how to declare variables. So there's two ways to declare it. There is a split declaration, meaning you say variable, um, and there's this particular naming convention that I would like to let everybody know that it is very important to use what I call camel case. The first letter of every other word um, capitalized. That way you can see that uh, if you were to put car name all in lowercase, you wouldn't know exactly know that car name is actually a car name versus car name. It could be Carname or something. So using naming conventions in camel case is very important when declaring your variables. Also, if you're done declaring that variable, also use a semicolon. You can have 10, 20, 100 variables that you can declare at once, back to back to back to back, and the separators are, of course, your semicolon. And then we talked about how to declare a variable is very easy, using an equal sign. Um, Using an equal sign allows the variable to store whatever information you put in those quotation marks. And yes, if it's a string value, you must use quotations. If it's a number value, you just can simply put an integer or a floating number. Floating number is anything that has a point like 1.1, 3 point your pi 3.14. Anytime you're going to include a dot in there, it's a floating point number, a solid number like a 1 or a 5. Uh, it's an integer. Um, you might just take in consideration when you're working with calculations with prime numbers, or that you might end up with a floating point number versus an actual integer. So it's very important for you to understand the programming aspect of working with numbers, and when you're declaring your variables, because they can easily turn from integers to floating numbers or vice versa in your conversion. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. Next is, let's follow the book a little bit. Okay. So yes, we talked about how using camel case or variable names or camel cases, some uh, instances where you can either use an underscore. I don't typically recommend having underscores, all over the place. But yes, using uh, caps in to standardize or to differentiate where the new word starts is most commonly practiced. All right, there's two types of places you can declare your variables, either on a global scale or on a local scale. I won't go too much into that, but when you're creating a large piece of coding, there may be some variables that you'll be using constantly uh, in your calculations, and there's some local variables that may change once that information gets processed. So there's a difference between creating local and creating global variables. And of course, I understand that the book is not very keen on showing you the differences or even give you prime examples of that. But bear with me on that one. I'll see how I can explain or include those materials from W3 schools or even other references after this. Okay, talking about how we assign values to variables or declaring our variables. We already talked about what a string is. Using the quotation marks, you can put a number directly in it, just using the semicolon, completing a stating a variable by using a semicolon. There's also instances where you can have iterations Therefore, for instance, lines equals lines plus one, and this is when you're doing loops and incrementing values every time a counter passes, or every time um, a variable is called. Uh, there's incremental operators or decremental operators for the same token. Therefore, um, these will become very popular when you're using loops. Mhm. The plus plus is an incremental, and the minus equals minus is also a decrement. Uh, and hopefully we get to work on these a little bit more elaborate. I know the chapter, this whole lesson is just a brief is a brief overview, and but hopefully we can get through some of these things and explain them a little bit better. Okay, up next are our operators, and they are the same operators you use to do any type of calculations. There is a slight differentiation of how to handle the um, the operators. Typically, when you have a combination of operators back to back, it takes precedence. It doesn't do the I mean, the minus, I mean, the PMDS, PMDOS. Typically, it usually goes from left to right as it's reading it, or unless you have strict rules where you're using the parentheses to do calculations either from left to right. So it is very important to make sure you have those parentheses to differentiate and be able to use these operators as intended. Mhm. Data types in your variables or in your operations. When you're creating an operation, for instance, results equals into a plus b plus c plus d. Uh, you can directly put numbers in that place, and of course it'll solve it for you. Um, so that's called a number or an integer. Um, so spelling, I mean, placing those in directly in your code um, is it's just very explicit. It's very explicit. Using a number is very self-explanatory. You're going to use a number, and once you're using your operators, you're going to end up having a number. A boolean. A boolean is a logical factor. Um, a boolean is used mainly for if statements. An if statement finds if something in your statement is true or a statement is false based on whatever data you plug in. So if you're asking if a variable equals to so and so, an if statement says if it's going to declare it if value is so and so happens to be equal to, and then it becomes true, or does not equal to, then it becomes false. So that's a logical factor, and those are called booleans. Last, um, well, second to last, I'm sorry, are strings. And a string is basically text. Uh, Very important when you're working with strings. Using those quotation marks is very important. No matter how long or how small your text statement is, you still have to use those quotations in it. No values is almost the same as using zero, but no value can be anything that represents zero. So it's like representing nothing, but you still have to put nothing in there. Therefore, you use the word null to represent nothing. I know it's a little weird. All right. So this is a little bit trickier, but very, very important. Why? Because your upcoming lab assignment will have some type of reference to this. Reason being is because when you do your operators or operations, then you're going to end up either having a number or you're having a string or a combination of both. So let's say if you're uh, what you're handling requires for you to have, you know, remember how you saw this document right, meaning this is what's going to end up getting displayed, everything that's in the quote, you know, in the quotations, plus your variable. Remember here, total is an actual variable, not actually the word the word total. So anything that's a string in quotes, and you have an operator, and then you have a name of a variable. And in this particular case, the variable ended up calculating was a 40. So that's why you have it, this plus that. So it's not necessarily used as an addition, but it's used to include whatever information was stored in the variable. So you're calling out the variable and you're including it with the statement and document.write, which is being displayed. All right. Next is going back to the whole parsing. um, let's say this is one good example, but let me bring up a better example when you're using either integers or floats. Okay, I thought I had it just about ready, but it's actually used in the code and for the upcoming lab assignment. So let me just give you once again the difference between integers and floating points, and parsing integers and parsing floats is converting a string, just like you had in that example of using strings and using numbers in combination. So when you parse the integers or you parse the floating numbers from a string, you separate them. So this is very um, useful when you're trying to not retract, like to extract numbers from a string. So you're using parsing integers and parsing floats. And they should have had this section in the very, very beginning, because a string, once again, is just a piece of text and it's included in those quotation marks. And whenever you're calling out a variable, of course, we saw earlier we're using the plus sign, or when you call the variable itself a string, then you can call call a string into a new string and declare that equals new string. Mm-hmm. Same thing goes, declaring values on a string. A little bit redundant, but I hope you get the essence of that. We talk about operators. This is one of the same type of assignments that you had last week. And I know that it was all inclusive, like it's just basically copying and pasting, but the way that I had asked you guys to include your code in CodePen was a little bit different, because you had to strip away some of the tags in order for it to work. So that was your task, to strip away and modify it to be able to use it in CodePen, because once you finish testing out in CodePen, then you have to remember to put the tags back, or include those in your HTML to make sure that they get referenced in, and then your the code works with your HTML. Okay. Calculating the length of the string, a little bit self-explanatory. I'm not going to go too much into that. You will have a quiz, 10 questions. This there may be a question pertaining to this, so just read up on it. And then if you need to come back to it as the quiz requires for you, then you may view this again. Substrings. Um, Basically is a string within another string, or whenever it gets called, then it ties it in. Like it's a parent-child relationship, and we'll talk about that also in when it comes back again. So this is not very, very, very important, but just as I said, read on it and make sure you just understand the overview of using substrings. I don't see us using that in any of the stuff of the projects. That's fine. Okay. Arrays. Very fun. I like arrays. Arrays are a way to get very many values and assign it to an object. For instance, I brought up a very good example on my PowerPoint presentation. An array is very special because it holds more than one value. When we're talking about an object, it can be anything. It can be an array. An object can be a person, it can be a car, it can be a tree, it can be a phone, but it's if a variable, I'm sorry, an array becomes more prevalent when you have more than one of that thing of the object. So, for instance, a very good example that I have here I have a constant that's named cars. Constant because I'm not going to change the value of that beyond that. Now I'm going to declare that there's many cars that I want to say that there are. There's not just one car. There's many cars. So, or many types of cars, but it's still the object is that they are cars. So the way to list that is, or say that there are many types of cars, but they're still on the fall under cars, is an array. So I can say I can have a dozen, half dozen, 20, 200 different types of cars, but they end up they being still a car. So that's an array. That's called an array. Same thing goes with this upcoming the variable. I had named that variable fruits because it's very general. I mean, tomatoes are fruits, believe it or not. Bananas and oranges or apples and mangoes. There's many different types of fruits. And I want to express that there are many and I want to list them. So there's two ways to actually create an array. Is either explicitly uh, stating that there are more than one, or creating a list of them. So I create a list, or I declare one by one. And you can have a number here, 20, and it automatically say 20 cars. Or you can have them independently here by string. There is a very special piece of code here that we're going to be using throughout. And it's called getting element by ID. Very important to start using this, or start learning how to use getting element by ID, simply because your project will end up depending on it. The way we use get element by ID is basically by the forms. I'm sorry, the most popular way is getting information from forums. And so, uh, remember on our forums, we create a class or a div ID or class ID or form ID, depending on the type of, if it's a, for instance, if it's a text box or text area, then you label that ID. And for instance, here, getting element by ID will retrieve whatever information you have there, even if it's a string. So this is where things start coming, full circle when you're creating a variable or you're creating, well, first and foremost, you're creating an object and then you're declaring your variables or simply listing your variables or obtaining variables from forms. I understand this sounds a little bit complicated, but again, if you still cannot, wrap your head around uh, getting the elements by ID, I will strictly ask you I would strongly suggest you guys to look into those additional resources that I will include, such as W3 schools. All right. Another one besides arrays will be sorting those arrays. I have had some people ask, and not ask, mention in their projects that they want to create a search bar. A search bar is a sort, pun intended, a sort of sorting, and there is a function to that. There's something is automatically inserted that creates that sorting feature for you by using that dot sort or the sorting of whatever variables are within this this parentheses. So prime example, um, the constant fruits, you already declared that you have a banana, you have an orange, you have an apple, and you have mangoes, and you say um, you want to sort it by alphabetical order. So typically, in an ascending or descending order, it'll automatically sort them for you, either alphabetically or numerically. So let's say if fruits were numbers, and if the variable was numbers instead, or then sorting will be either ascending or descending, depending on what you're searching for. Mm-hmm. So these two will become very popular in the upcoming weeks. Um, your upcoming lab assignment will have this particular feature, getting element by ID, and I may have to elaborate just a tad more on the upcoming video, and I may have to um, insert that video on and the lab assignment Monday afternoon during my office hour, so I can gauge how much I can have you guys submit. Let's let's go back to the book real quick. We already talked about numeric arrays, same way, and then string arrays, combination of both, sorting. Okay, this is also a really cool one. The name split. Yes, splitting arrays. And there's just so much assignments I can create from just these types of samples used, but we are running pretty fast, and this chapter is lesson is very loaded, and I'm gonna strip it away and just focus on the things that are more important. Remember, I still have that list that is quite imperative for me to teach you guys how to finish your projects. And there we have sorting with the string arrays. And this is very much what I wanted to express. The reason is that you wanted to find something and have a search bar. Okay, and then it'll spit out, you know, the ideally um, names or items and in likeness. So that was it. um, from here, using functions, you guys ran into those last week. Basically, a function is a formula of what you wanted to do after you call it. So, a formula, for instance, this formula here we're going to call greet formula. Whenever we want the formula to appear in your code, then we explicitly call it out. That when it gets called, greet what do you want it to do. So one thing is to write your definitions of what you want the function to do, and this typically those are within your curly braces. Whenever you call function greet, then you want it to create an alert and it says greetings, and then add the variable who, and this who also is included in your argument and ending with a exclamation mark. So it's greetings, and then take the information from your variable called who, and then your exclamation mark. Your upcoming assignment will entail something like this. It's going to create a function that is going to calculate something. So and reason for that, this is going to be very popular with shopping cart, because once you obtain um, a list of things that you're going to add to the shopping cart, now you're going to need to do some simple math. You have to add each of the line item that you've included. Then you have to uh, create a total and then display your total. So A plus B plus C plus D plus whatever else other arrays that you've created in your shopping cart. And then on top of that, you're gonna want to use another operator such as the tax, finding a tax. So it's multiplication. You're using multiplication to use your to create your tax, and then add that again. So it's total, subtotal, tax, total. So, and all those variables are going to have to be imported from your forms ID. So that's what we're going to create for your assignment. These are all very, very good samples. Okay. Rounding, truncating, using the math function, very popular. Uh, okay, creating a date function is also a very popular, or creating a date object. I'm sorry, not necessarily a function, but an object retrieving information formatted as a date. That's exactly what that is. So if you want to have it formatted as a date, then you need to have uh, that information imported separately. And that was basically it. A very quick chapter, not very helpful, and in the sense of being in tune to getting the full detail, full scope of each of the items that were discussed. So that's why I ask you guys to be very much in tune to getting any and all information that you still cannot understand directly from W3 schools. We talk about strings, and that'll give you some information about strings. We talked about arrays, and there we go. That was one of the listed samples that we used, and then it kind of helped um, explain what arrays are and how they're used, and array sorting and array constants and stuff like that. So, of course, folks, have any questions regarding uh, the terminology or the items discussed in the book, this is one of the best sources of there is out there to clarify that for you. Okay. In the upcoming video, I will discuss more of what's in going to be included in your lab assignment. It won't be too long, but we kind of have to move a little bit fast because we only have at most 5 to 6 weeks. After this week, we may have about 5 weeks left, and I do want you guys to have at least 3 weeks, 3 full weeks to finish your final project before I can say that your guys are ready to submit your final project, which will also be just about the same time frame where you guys gonna be having your final exams. So I want to kind of stagger that and not having all those, the project being due and your final exam due the same week. So I kind of want to have those items separated. So we kind of gonna have to move a little bit fast, and just so you guys can have plenty of time to put those projects together. All right, so this concludes our week 11 lecture from the book. Like I said, feel free to reach out. My office hours on Monday between 6 and 7. If you still have any other questions beyond that regarding your assignments or regarding some of the information from the book, then please reach out, message me on Blackboard. If you still requesting some one-on-one tutoring, that is possible. Message me. We will dedicate a time frame so that we can set up a Teams meeting, and then of course we'll settle whatever questions you have there and then. Right. So look forward to seeing you guys in this upcoming lab video.